You've been hearing headlines all morning long about the Department of Justice looking into what is expected to be a leak of top secret Ukraine war plans. And that's just one of the headlines when it comes to global conflict. We'll touch on a lot of those. But an even bigger headline, I think, is that France is looking to get away from the U.S. dollar. This after you've got a whole host of other countries looking at getting away from the U.S. dollar as the global reserve currency when it comes to dealing in petrol. If you're not familiar with the concept of the petrodollar, this is something I've talked about even back 15 years ago when I was doing Saturday Session with Bishop. And that was then not a lot of people knew about what the petrodollar was, why it's so significant, and how it may have led to the United States getting into other conflicts, especially with the likes of Libya, which back then Libya was looking at getting away from the U.S. dollar as the global reserve currency for their trade with oil and so on. And now we've got a whole host of other countries lining up, including concerns that China, Russia, Saudi Arabia, Brazil, Iran, and now even France lining up to get away from the U.S. dollar. The French president, Emmanuel Macron, he said that there's great risk that Europe gets caught up in crises that are not ours, which prevent it from building its strategic autonomy. This is after you had the Chinese leader Xi Jinping meet with France's ruler, Emmanuel Macron, and talking about strategic autonomy as the Communist Chinese Party, as their officials offer to refer with continued meetings with European leaders. So what would it mean if the U.S. dollar is no longer the global reserve when it comes to store of value, when it comes to being able to trade petroleum, when it comes to a whole host of other things? And are we going to see an absolute plummet of the dollar's value? And then by turn, inflation continues to go through the roof, and you've got our standard of living expected to diminish quite a bit, let alone our powers to be able to be influential around the globe. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have somebody on hold. Thanks so much for standing by. Your thoughts on this?
Yeah. This is just another step in going to the digital currency.
And you're talking about a central bank digital currency? Because digital currencies are already out there. Full disclosure, I'm invested in Bitcoin. I've got some Dogecoin. I've got some Ethereum. I'm not like heavily invested in it or anything, but I've been tinkering around with Bitcoin since it first came out. I kicked myself in the rear end that I didn't buy a whole bunch when it first came out because it was pretty cheap when it first came out, but I obviously was not anywhere near my career where I am now, so I couldn't afford it back then. So you're talking more about the central bank digital currency, which would be a centralized control over a digital money system.
Well, the U.S. dollar is still considered a currency.
Yep.
And that was they do this. Every country can cash in different countries' values of dollars and stuff. I mean, you go down to Mexico or something like that, their dollar is not worth near as much as what our dollar was. So, I mean, it only makes sense is to get rid of the U.S. dollar. And this would just transition into a global currency, a one currency that would be a digital or a global currency. A lady talked about a global currency reset years ago. She just passed away here a couple of years ago, but she worked for the World Economic Forum, and she was involved with this currency stuff going on. And the U.S. dollar has always been a threat in the last roughly a decade. It seems that the U.S. dollar has been a stumbling block for the United Nations and stuff like that. So that's how I'm looking at it from the work that she did. Is she was exposing how they're trying to eliminate the dollar from the global aspect of it. So this is just another step into a global currency.
And you can see China making various moves, talking with Brazil, India, France, even Russia, making these alliances. A couple of weeks ago, China and Vladimir Putin, Xi Jinping, they were caught on camera talking about, essentially carving up the world for the next 100 years. And I don't think people necessarily understand the detriment of a central digital currency. Right now, cash allows for anonymity. You can't really track cash all that great. You can go down and buy your groceries and everything you need with cash and not be tracked and traced. However, if you use a credit card or if you use a central bank digital currency, if one's ultimately implemented, that's going to be able to be tracked and traced, and not just tracked and traced, but also controlled, meaning you don't pay your taxes, well, you can't spend your money on anything else, and you don't follow the political line, well, you're going to be barred from using your dollars. And a lot of people who are religious look at the book of Revelation, and they talk about the mark of the beast and how you won't be able to trade or sell or anything or take part in regular commerce if you don't take that mark. A lot of people see this as pretty alarming, and I know people are going to brush it off and say, oh, that's just religious crackpottery. Well, no, I mean, it's a serious, legitimate concern even outside of the religious context of the book of Revelations because of the impacts on human freedom.
These banks, Greg, are even getting kids their own debit cards and stuff like that. They're indoctrinating them in with debit cards, and parents are giving their kids debit cards, getting them prepared.
Yeah, I got to say, my wife over the weekend, she laughed because somebody asked, you got any cash on you wherever we were, and she always carries more cash than I do. For some reason, listen, I'm a very small L libertarian, fully admitted, and even though I have those feelings, I use my credit card for everything, and I use my credit card for everything because I get awesome points. I've got a bank of points that I can buy some plane tickets with like that just because I use my credit card for every transaction and I pay it off every month and so on. So I get these awesome points. You're talking about incentivization. It's very much there in the ecosystem already. But I'm freaked out about a central bank digital currency, and I think some others across the country are as well, including in Florida and South Dakota. They've actually passed legislation or are looking to pass legislation elsewhere as well that pushes back against the idea of a central bank digital currency being required. The Fed can go out and make a Fed coin if they want, but to require that. Now, what's different from Bitcoin? It's decentralized. You don't have a central hub controlling how many Bitcoin there are. There's only going to be a certain amount of Bitcoin out in the market. Not fully there yet, but it's only going to get to 21 million Bitcoin. I think it's like 19 point something. But once it gets to 21 million, it's done. They're not going to produce any more Bitcoin, which has an inherent value at that point. And then when it comes to the decentralization of Bitcoin, Bitcoin is based on nodes independent of each other verifying the blockchain. All right, so all of these nodes independent verify the blockchain on these transactions, which makes it decentralized and really, in a way, makes those nodes banks of their own. So it's a difficult concept, but conversations about currency is a difficult concept to really get your head around as well, other than just looking at a greenback and saying, hey, that's worth something. Is it really? Good morning. You're on WMAY.
Morning, Greg.
Hey.
I don't want to be too political on this, but, I mean, not only is Joe Biden foolish, I mean, he's just dangerously incompetent. There's a reason all these countries don't want the petrodollar because it favors us. I want a currency that favors us. I mean, people like me, retirees, our money's invested in dollars.
Right.
I'm sorry, but I really believe that, Joe Biden's worked for the federal government his entire life. He has no concept of fiscal control or currency because when you work for the feds, the money falls from the sky every day. And if you don't have enough of it, you just print more.
Well, let me just rephrase that, if you don't mind. Biden's worked for the taxpayers nearly his entire life. He gets paid for by the taxpayers, and it's the taxpayers that are on the hook for whenever the Fed goes out and reprints money.
He's never balanced the budget. He's never worked in the private sector. I'm telling you, this is a big deal. If we allow some other country, I mean, look at what happened to Great Britain when they disconnected from the pound, from the gold standard. I mean, This is a big, big deal. And to have this talked about like it's just about Bitcoin is nonsense. You know, this would allow the Chinese and the Russians to willfully, even more than they do now, manipulate our currency. And, you know, since we are now such a big debtor country, we're on the wrong side of that equation. And I just, you know, I hear this stuff and I don't know what these people are drinking or smoking in Washington, but they don't have the interests of the citizens of the United States in mind when they talk about this stuff. You know, this is the same woman, Janet Yellen, who, oh, yeah, you know, I was wrong about inflation. I was wrong about this. I was wrong about that. Yeah. They're dangerously incompetent. And I'll listen to your comment.
I appreciate the call. And, yeah, it's fascinating to see the projections that have been made. You know, Janet Yellen saying that inflation is transitory. What was that, a year plus ago? And we're still dealing with elevated levels of inflation. There's a headline in the newspaper today in the SJR about inflation's gone down under Biden. Well, it peaked during Biden's administration and then has come down. So interesting to see how it's being characterized and how the narrative's being pushed. But when it comes to the idea of a central bank digital currency, the fear is that that's going to lead to a social credit system where if you are driving around too much, they're going to limit your ability to buy gas because you're polluting the earth too much. Using a central bank digital currency, they could do such a thing. They're already doing such things over in China with a social credit system. Implementing a central bank digital currency would escalate their ability to control the public in that way. It wouldn't just be about your habits. It could be about your politics. You were, your phone pinged at this particular political rally and you are considered a dissident now. So you can't, buy gas or food or certain things. So those are some of the major concerns there are with the idea of a central bank digital currency. But if we're going to be moving towards digital currencies in general, which we already are because of the implementation and the take-up of things like Bitcoin, do we want a central bank digital currency or do we want a decentralized currency, the likes of Bitcoin? So interesting to have these conversations. Here we are in 2023, and I think we're going to have a lot more. So